All right, 7th grade, we are going to do the PowerPoint on aquatic ecosystems today. We already talked about land biomes, so now we're going to move on to an aquatic one and talk about the different ecosystems within. So we're moving from land underwater. So the major types of aquatic ecosystems is basically anything, any water environment and the different organisms that live there. So any water type environment. There are three main ones. It's called a freshwater, estuary, and a marine ecosystem. Those are the three main types of aquatic ecosystems. So just like when we talked about land biomes, we talked about biotic and abiotic factors. So the abiotic factors, as we know, are the non-living parts of the environment. So in an aquatic ecosystem, that includes how the temperature of the water, so how hot or cold it is, the water depth, so how far down in the water it is, how much sunlight you get, the oxygen level of the water pH, which is the acidity, the salinity, which is how much salt is in the water, and the rate of water flow. Those are all the different abiotic factors of the environment. So depending on the temperature, different organisms can survive, and all these can influence what lives there. So how hot or cold the water is going to affect what creatures can live there. Certain animals can live at deeper depths than others. How much light is there? If you go down deep into the ocean, you'll find there's tons of animals that probably have never been discovered down there, just because of how dark and how large that area is. The oxygen level, it has, animals, even if they breathe water, they still breathe oxygen. So if there's not a lot of oxygen in the water, then the animals will not be able to survive. In the water flow, so you have animals that live in water that sits like a pond or a lake. Then you have other animals that can't live there, but they live in rivers because the water keeps flowing, is constantly flowing. So we're going to first start talking about freshwater ecosystems. Freshwater has very little salt. This is going to be where we get some of our water that we drink. It could be from freshwater sources. Lakes, ponds, wetlands, rivers, streams. This is pretty much all. A lot of these things are here around in Ohio where we live, and it's not, there's no salt in it. So Hocking River, Lake Logan, Lake Erie, Muskingum River, the Ohio River. Plus all kinds of streams and things like that are all around Ohio. Wetlands, you have a lot of those down in Florida, and basically the south of the United States. Lakes and ponds are bodies of water surrounded pretty much mostly by lands. Now they could have rivers and such going in and out of them, but they're mostly surrounded by land on all sides. So a part of these ecosystems are going to be the plants that grow around the edges of the lakes or ponds, and the plants that live underneath. You have algae and all sorts of plants that grow underwater. Lakes and ponds, protist, algae, and amoebas. The eggs of frogs, like little tadpoles, some insects you'll find all over there. Clams, bacteria, worms live on the bottom of lakes and ponds. They break down dead materials. Could be dead fish, all that. Plus the waste product of different fish and animals sinks to the bottom and can help fertilize and help other animals live. Frogs, turtles, fish, ducks, all have adapted to live in lakes and ponds, or around them. My dad has a pond around his house, and there's all those different things have at one point in time lived around the pond and used that as their own little ecosystem. So there's like a little freshwater ecosystem right around my dad's house. There's also a stream, so there's two different types of freshwater ecosystems right outside of where I grew up. So this is a good little picture of it here. How many different plants and animals are adapted to life in a pond. So you can see all the different ones. You have a little crustacean, little crawdad there, little fish, worms, the little bacteria. You have the different types of fish, a turtle, a frog, an insect, and a duck, and all kinds of plants. So another one is a wetland. It's saturated or soaked with water for a good chunk of the year. Bogs, marshes, and swamps. So they could have very unique animals that live in these areas: alligators, shrews, herons, ducks, frogs. They live other places. They live in that's very wet soil. A lot of the biggest wetland areas, like I said before, is going to be down south around Florida, in the southeast part of the United States of America. Wetlands, they do something really nice. They collect filter water by removing pollutants. They protect nearby land and shore from flood and erosion because all that water sits, filters through there and doesn't and may not, affect other areas. Now, obviously, there's a certain point where it won't work anymore and it could end up flooding. But this is kind of so if you have a wetland, you can see there how on the picture there that it kind of has like a underground little lake there. So you never want to build on a wetland because if you do, that's going to flood quite a bit, as you can see. So what are some of the effects of replacing a wetland with a development? Well, you're going to have it could sink because of all that wet soil. Things could end up sinking. You'll get flooded constantly. So you don't really want to build like a housing development on a wetland or a swamp. Rivers and streams, fish, insects, mosses. So you can see here just some of the things that rivers and streams do. Have very fast and slow moving water. The organisms are adapted, so they're able to grab on and hold on to and stay where they want, or they kind of move around with it. An estuary is where a river meets the ocean, a very large body of water. So all rivers eventually flow into the ocean, whichever ocean. It could be the Pacific, Atlantic, Indian, Southern, Arctic, whatever. But they're all going to flow there. So that everywhere a river meets one of these large bodies of water, it's called an estuary. It's a mixture of fresh and salt. So they could have very unique. They could have fish that the organisms that live there are adapted to survive in both fresh and salt water. Seagrass, mangrove trees, fish, oysters, mussels, and certain water birds. So you can see here, you can kind of see right where they mix. You can see that little line. That is a possibility to see in real life. Is you might be able to see where the two different types of water mix with each other. There are places on the earth where you can kind of see a line between two different types of water from each other. So it's estuaries. You want to make sure that they're really big in parts of the environment. We want to make sure that we are protecting them. We don't build all over them and things like do a lot of building because all these they have very unique ecosystems. So we don't want to mess it up. That's where fish, shellfish, birds they breed there. So if we build there or start overhunting, we could really affect the populations. Oil spills, you can see there. In 2010, in the Gulf of Mexico, a bunch of animals and plants were killed because of an oil spill. So we got to make sure we're careful about that. The saltwater ecosystems is over 70% of the surface of the planet. That's the oceans. Coastal oceans, which is right along the coast of land. Open ocean is just kind of in the middle of nowhere, and then deep ocean is deep underground. And each one is going to could have different abiotic factors. Intertidal and neritic zone. Intertidal zone is the land between high and low tide. That includes like your beach and your shores. This area is where right along the beach where, at one point in the day it could be a beach and then you go back, 6-7 hours later and it's high tide and all of a sudden it's all underwater. So this is the intertidal zone. It's like in between the tides. So these animals and organisms that live there have adapted to that. So they've adapted to being underwater or being out of water, the change in salinity, The wave action, because the waves in the ocean, if they're underwater, they may not get the weight when they're on land. The waves might crash on them as the water's starting to rise. So they're adapted to survive that, to where it's not going to hurt them very much. The neritic zone is the underwater zone from the shore to the edge of the continental shelf. That's basically, the continental shelf is where, it's kind of the drop-off point from the land to deep ocean. So that's called the neritic zone. Light will reach the bottom of this area. Coral reefs and kelp are found in this area. So if you've ever, a coral reef is a good way to remember where the neritic zones are. The open ocean is all water, surface water, to a depth of about 2,000 meters or 6,500 feet. Most sea life is found there. Plankton, that's the main organism in this area. Very dark, cold conditions is where they're at. They live more close to the bottom. These are super tiny organisms, but these are what feed a lot of whales. A lot of different whales will basically survive off of eating plankton. The bathyl zone goes from the edge of the continental shelf, so that drop off to the base or the bottom is also open, part of it. I'm not really going to concern about remembering the bathyl zone. Deep zone is basically any part of the ocean under 2,000 meters to the bottom. Some of these animals have bioluminescence. If you remember from the movie Finding Nemo, when they are deep in the ocean, they follow this little tiny light. It kind of mesmerized, and then all of a sudden it lit up this fish, and this nasty looking fish, and it chased them all around. That is an example of bioluminescence. Their body basically creates light that could attract mates or prey. It kind of mesmerized Dory and Nemo's dad, who I can't remember his name. And that's kind of what it can do to regular fish. So the fish is in this completely dead black zone, dark zone in the bottom of the ocean. All of a sudden they see this light, and it kind of like mesmerizes them, and then all of a sudden the fish can basically get its dinner. These microorganisms are going to live by hydrothermal vents. So this is where basically the crust of the earth, the crust opens up. This is could be where magma is at. So it's kind of have a lot of different chemicals from this magma that's going to push up through the water and keep it warm. So a lot of these animals live right next to these vents where, it's close to, it doesn't necessarily have magma right at the surface, but it's a direct line to it, so it keeps it nice and warm. So there could be a little boom of life in an otherwise dead zone at the bottom of the ocean. All right, now that is our video. Well, that is our PowerPoint here on land biomes. This is going to be the last section of this life science unit. We are going to move on to elements and the periodic table next, which is what the third packet that you will be picking up this week is all about. Thank you, and good night.